All right. Well, welcome to the College Admission Lab from Khan Lab School. I am your host, Brennan Barnard, Director of College Counseling. And as always, I'm joined today by our founder, Sal Khan. Sal is also the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, Schoolhouse.World, and Khan World School. He's also author of The One World Schoolhouse, which he published in 2012, and most recently, Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. He holds 3 degrees from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And our guest today is Whitney Soule, who's the Vice Provost and Dean of Admission at the University of Pennsylvania, my hometown. Whitney has worked as an admission leader for 3 decades and also served the profession in a host of ways on the boards of the Common App and Coalition for College and College Board and the Character Collaborative and many others that I could list, but it would take us most of the show. So welcome to you both. And maybe Whitney, maybe you could just start by giving us kind of a brief overview of your kind of educational journey and how you got to where you are.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for spending time with us this evening. And my career in higher ed started about a year after I graduated from college. I went to a small liberal arts college and I was a admissions kid while I was in school. I did tour guides and helped out the admission office, tour guiding and helped out the admission office quite a bit. And then a job was available in the admission office a year after I had graduated. I was living close by working for the Red Cross and was hired into that role. And I didn't really know what I was going to do in that role particularly, but I was looking forward to it. And back in the early 90s, it was high school visits and driving around with a map on your lap, trying to find a school and see students and college fairs. And I spent time at that school learning the profession. I moved on to another small liberal arts college and worked there for 11 years. I earned my master's in education at Harvard while I was still working, found my way to Bowdoin College after that, and was at Bowdoin for 13 years. And my role there was as my last role that I had was as a senior vice president, dean of admission and financial aid. And then from there to being a vice provost, dean of admissions at the University of Pennsylvania, which is very different kind of institution and approach toward education. And it's been a really exciting journey, and it's hard to believe that it's been more than 30 years.
Well, and I think they call Philly the Brunswick of Pennsylvania, don't they?
Right. I mean, like coastal Maine to
Right.
urban Philadelphia are 2 very different things. I should mention too that my role as dean of admission is for the undergraduate admissions at the University of Pennsylvania, which is there are 12 schools at Penn, but only 4 of them have undergraduate portions of the school, undergraduate schools, which is the College of Art and Science, Engineering, Wharton School of Business, and the Nursing School.
Great. Thanks. And so we will be taking all of your questions today. And you can also use the chat to share where you're zooming in from. So let us know where you're coming in from and whether you're a parent or a student or a counselor or just interested person checking this out. And we'll be using the Q&A to share all your questions for our guests. So Whitney, maybe we could just kind of start talking about like a lot of students are starting their college search right now. A lot of juniors are starting their college search, and a lot of seniors will soon be getting their decisions. They'll be trying to make their choices of where they're going to go to college. There is a lot of data out there about college admission, right? So how can families use that information to understand the kind of the story that colleges are trying to tell?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's not a hard one to answer, but it's hard to abide by the answer. So what I would say is there is more access to data points and information about institutions and about college admissions or components of college admission, chances of admission and so forth than ever before. And also a lot of advice and environments where people will tell you what that means and how to interpret it. And one of the things that can happen is that when a data point gets removed from the context in which it was originally provided, and is put into a context to help answer a question that somebody has, it starts to lose its fidelity as it gets further and further from the source of data. So a good example would be someone, well, here's a good example. We, a couple of years ago at Penn, in releasing our information about admitted students right about now, at the end of March, one of the things that I had written in our news release is that, among other things, many of our students had the following things in common. And one of those things that so it was 80% of them do community service, 40% of them have jobs, about a third of them do research, and I went on to offer a couple other details. And it was intended to show our students have many things in common. They're also individuals, and we read them with so many different things in mind. And we very deliberately did not create a news release around statistics. The admit rate is this, and percentage of population from this. And so we were really talking about the components of the humanness of these students that we recognized. The detail about research, where I said a third of our admitted students had done research in high school, became a story that got further and further from it, nested in a list of components of things that our students happen to have in common when we admitted them, became a story of a requirement to get into Penn, and then was in many ways sold as, you need to have research to get into Penn, and if you pay me, I can help you get the research that you need. And never did anybody at Penn say research was necessary or that it's the reason that somebody got admitted. It was simply a thing our students who were admitted had in common. So when you're looking at things like admit rates or essays that got me in kind of posts, admit rates are real. An essay might be real that a student is saying, I wrote this and I got in. But unless you were sitting in the admission office evaluating and participating in that decision, you don't know whether that essay influenced the decision or not. And so it's easy to latch on to things that feel like they're giving you direction and insight, but they might be very far from the source of where the information was generated. So go to the source is my answer. If you have a question about how admission works at the University of Pennsylvania, come to our website, get into an information session. We do them virtually, we do them in person. This is true for most schools. So go to where you need the information about the place or thing you're most interested in.
Thanks. And Sal, I mean, you've talked a lot before about pattern matching. And so like, what's the danger in data? I mean, your early career was in analytics, right? And consulting. And I mean, how do you look at that? You're muted.
Never in consulting. I got rejected from the few times I tried to interview.
I thought you were in.
No, but I was an analyst at a hedge fund. So yes, I think well, yeah, I mean, what I see when people, I was just being interviewed earlier today about the luxury I had of early Khan Academy, when I thought when I was making these videos, it was low stakes. I was making it for my family. And because of that, I was very comfortable. I would maybe make a few errors and then cross them out. And I was myself. I was authentically myself. And I tell people, it was a blessing, because had I thought the stakes were higher, had someone came and given me $10 million, say, make the best possible videos and 100 million people are going to watch these, I probably would have said, oh, I can't make mistakes, and I gotta script it, and I gotta do everything perfectly, and then I probably would have produced something less good. I probably would have produced something that's not authentically me. And I think some of that stuff is kind of what your question is about, where sometimes students, and very often, and especially students who might apply to, say, a University of Pennsylvania, they feel a lot of stress that they need to get into either UPenn or a school like UPenn of similar selectivity. And when the stakes feel that high, I see a lot of politicians sometimes do this. The closer they get to their goal, they become less authentic. They become like, oh, my campaign managers told me to do this and this and this, so I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to crack a joke. I'm not going to get in trouble. I see students do this all the time, where they want to get into that school so bad, or a certain set of schools so badly. They're like, I cannot take a risk. I cannot be who I am. And okay, I saw that essay online that got that kid in. I know that other kid from last year got in. I know that other kid from last year didn't get in. And so then they just try to, okay, I'm not going to be like that kid. I'm going to be like this kid. And then they try to create this perfect thing, which might a lot of times feel kind of created by committee or fairly, not authentic. I've just met Whitney. I've met other admissions directors. I think one of their secret, or maybe not so secret, superpowers is that they're great at detecting authenticity, and and actually, I'll say my own admissions experience. I I live out here in Silicon Valley where there's a lot more like awareness about getting into certain schools, et cetera. And I think about how lucky I was when my school had never, I was the first kid who applied to MIT. And I wasn't like MIT, or I mean, I really wanted to go, but I was like, well, there's a couple of other schools I'm be happy to go to. And so when I wrote the essay, I just had fun with it. And I drew this picture and I was almost like goofing off a little bit. I'm so glad I did that because I mean, we didn't have the money, but if my parents could have hired consultants, or if I'd had all these other, message boards, I wouldn't have done that. I probably would have done something much safer, much blander. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have gotten in. So yes, I think be very careful, go into these. Obviously you have to be a little bit thoughtful about how to represent your best self. We've helped some students at Khan Lab School. There was one student, I think once again, he was writing about all of the things that he thought the admissions people wanted to hear. And then I said, well, you run a podcast. That's pretty cool. Like, it's like a real one. It's not just some fake thing you invented just to get into college. Like, write about that. I was a guest on it. You have a good guess. And he's like, really? With that, I was like, yeah, that's way more interesting than the stuff you've written about. So, I mean, hopefully you get some good advice for stuff like that. But yeah, it's all, be our authentic self. And remember, these admissions officers, they want people who are going to do great things in the world and smart and all of that, but they want people who are going to be amazing members of their community. And if you have something unique that you can add to that community that's authentic, like really lean into that.
Well, and Whitney, there's a question here, or a comment in the chat, from a parent in Northern Virginia, and it says there's a lot of anxiety in parents and students regarding doing multiple things, from AP courses to volunteering to getting sports and music, and the list goes on. And they say, we believe in letting our son explore and enjoy his high school years, but at times also doubt our approach and feel anxious. So what's the best way to guide students in today's competitive environment?
I'm really glad that the question is in the chat so we can talk about it, because I think what's being expressed there happens for so many families. And I was in a conversation this morning with a parent who is does not have a child looking at Penn, but just was asking me for advice. And the conversation we had is very much like this. The student is interested in a particular kind of education and STEM focused, and is in junior year now and has had a probably the most rigorous course load available or allowed in their school up through junior year, and is crafting the senior year curriculum and has achieved the highest levels in the STEM fields and needs to fill in. So STEM is checked, right? Like,
Done.
managed to fully invest in what was available there. And now the question is what to do about senior level humanities. And the students' interests are in two electives, one in English and one in history, on topics that students really interested in and really excited about taking the class with each of the teachers who are assigned to those classes next year, or taking an AP Humanities division class. And it's not the class he wants. And the advice he's getting is, if you don't have as difficult a course load in your senior year, you're going to get shut out. And the conversation that we had was, he's not going to get shut out. There are schools that are going to value a curriculum that is tops in everything in senior year. But if that's not going to keep him out of a STEM school. It may keep him out of a particular school if that's what they're valuing in a review. But as a student over time, and someone who has continued to pursue the things that interest him, including STEM, but also he's really excited about these other classes, the goal here is not to start with, it needs to be X school. So what do I need to get into X school? The goal really is, how do you keep this student in the space where learning is really fun. And there are so many schools that can deliver on the kind of degree that the student wants, where there will be challenge and excitement. And I think most schools are going to appreciate the curriculum that he has all the way through. And so it was more a conversation around extending the enthusiasm he already has and making sure he's not to, sort of what Sal was talking about earlier, starting to organize himself all of a sudden away from things that matter for him to suit an environment that may not match him very well if that's what they value the most.
Well, and I mean, I think the idea is that, schools like Penn could take a full class of probably students with perfect test scores and straight A's in the most rigorous courses, right? You could probably do that easily, and you want more than that, and that's what, Sal, you were talking about too. And I guess the question for students like that, Sal, is like, how can they keep their joy of learning and their joy of exploring?
Well, I'll start with the parents, and look, I'll try to be as authentic and transparent as possible. I mean, Brennan knows my oldest is going to be a junior next year, so we're starting to get into that zone. And yes, I won't preach too hard because it is, I gained a lot. I met my wife. We went to college together, and I have so many great memories. And so we all project things onto our children, or sometimes inadvertently do. And what I try to remind myself over and over again, and it's not easy, is like, look, it is easy to get fixated on, oh, I want my child to have the exact same or similar opportunities. Or if you never got that opportunity, maybe it's even more pressure to feel that I want my child to get that opportunity that I never got. Um, but I also remind myself, and I try to do this before I try to project some of that anxiety onto my children. Um, and I even, kids that I went to school with, that they went to all the right schools, but, at some point that anxiety, the stress, other elements of their life, just, that it didn't work out well. And then I know many folks that as long as they're in a healthy environment, they're finding a good social circle, they're finding great opportunities to challenge themselves, professors that are willing to, connect with, et cetera, et cetera. They do amazing things. And, the blessing that we have, especially in the United States, is like, if Penn is the type of school that you could potentially get into, whether or not hopefully if Penn's your first choice, you get in, awesome. But if you don't, you're going to go someplace pretty darn good and you're going to have great opportunities. Um, and it's actually much more about whether you went to Penn versus U Chicago or Johns Hopkins or University of Virginia or UCLA. It's much more about what you do with any one of those, what you do with any one of those opportunities. Because any one of those, honestly, if you take the right mindset to it, you're going to have all of the opportunities in the world. And any one of those, if you take the wrong mindset to it, you're not going to have a great time or have great outcomes. Brennan and I oftentimes tell to the Con Lab School kids, it's like there's no right decision. It's about making the decision right. And so that's what I first tell myself as a parent, and I encourage everyone. Like, as Buddha says, attachment is the cause of all suffering. So don't get fixated. You might hear some schools, or your neighbor went to some schools, or someone's getting in your head about this brand or that brand. But we have the blessing here in the United States. There's many very, very, very good schools where you can get all the opportunities that you might want. And for students, I would say the same thing. Um, you know, I don't think it hurts trying to give them a little bit. I try to do this with the Con Lab School students. Brendan and I are obviously always advising them, and even with my own son, I am telling him a little bit of like, look, you're really into that. Um, make sure, like, this is a good time for you to really invest in that passion, so that it's so that the world can see that you are really into it. Like, so there is a little bit of thought, I think, that it's not horrible to give, like, okay, how will this, how can you make sure that this thing that you care about, like, other people can see that to some degree. But at the same time, I try to be very careful about, like, but like, look, it's up to you. Like, you know, it's up to you whether you even want to apply to, a hyper selective school or not. It's up to you whether you want to, here's an idea. Maybe you want to do this or that, but that's just my idea. It's up to you where your interests are. I'm here to answer your questions. I can tell you the trade-offs. I can tell you at least the trade-offs as I understand them. I don't even have perfect information. And so, yeah, that's what I just keep reminding myself as a parent. The last thing I want to do is my kid get into the hardest school to get into, and they're not there for the right reasons. They're not happy, or I projected so much anxiety onto them for the next 2 years that they stay anxious, and they're not able to get the most out of there and develop, the way that they should. So yes, we should all get a little unattached to things, and that, yes, students, they should enjoy the process. I've been telling Khan Lab School kids, I mean, like things like essay writing are so stressful, and I like to just sit to them like, what was the last time you laughed? What was the last time you cried? What was the last time you like? You don't necessarily have to write your essay about that, but that'll start jogging your memory about like moments in your life that are meaningful, and if you can capture some of that, then that'll make the essay interesting for the readers. And I remind them that, like, look, people like Whitney are going to be reading tens of thousands of applications, and most students actually do fall in. I mean, Whitney, you tell me if this is true or not. Most kids, I think a lot of kids, I don't know if most, do fall into the pattern of trying to write exactly what they think the readers want to see, and like, let me regurgitate my resume in essay form and do some humble brags and this and that. Um, but really, I think, and you tell me when if this is true, the ones that like are a little bit different, the ones that like put a little smile on your face, or like, wow, that's an interesting idea, or like, wow, this is different, as long as it's not too offensively different, are the ones that kind of you're like, well, this is interesting. I don't know. Whitney, is that the case?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the I think that a student in their anxiety, which is fed by many sources, so this is not the fault of the student, but they, react to all of the pressure, can really end up sanitizing themselves out of their own application with intervention from and advice from so many different people. And it doesn't mean it isn't a very strong application, but when you read for a whole person, as we do, it is easier to connect to students who have more of themselves. It's truly more cohesive when what they're writing about is something they actually care about. And it sounds like the way they would, it's polished because it's a written document. It's not a stream of consciousness and conversation, but when it sounds like how they would communicate elsewhere in their lives, then it's much easier to take in what it is that they're writing about. Even if it's a topic that many students write about, it still can resonate really well when it is authentic, to use the word that you, and it's not bad to get help and support in an application. I mean, we want students to have a polished, good, cohesive representation, but it's easy to start to, and it's easy to start to give over to particularly adult advice when a student is trying to get themselves into the application. I do want to just say one thing too about the curricular choices, which one of the ways that I think anxiety can escalate in thinking about curricular choices for a really selective place like Penn is that they assume that what we respond to is ascending achievement. So as many difficult courses as a student can possibly fit in, and also be an expert in another thing. And then when they look around, Saul, you were referencing this, you know somebody who got in, and you see what you know about what they did, and you see somebody who didn't, and about what they did or didn't do extracurricularly or academically. And then you say, well, if that person got in, I need to do more than that person so that I stand out in an applicant pool that's full of people like that. And that is just not how it works, right? That we're responding to, we have students who do not have perfect records. We have students who do not have the most difficult course in every subject. We have students who are bringing to us so many different things. We have to be sure that they have the content mastered and the skill to use it to be at a good starting point for what it is they're going to take on at Penn. That's a baseline, but that doesn't mean the most of everything for every student.
Well, and thank you. And maybe you could just talk a little, Whitney, but there are a bunch of questions coming in about kind of, how are magnet schools looked at, and, students who might have more challenging courses at a magnet school and their GPA is a little lower. And then there's questions about how do colleges feel about the IB curriculum and versus AP. Can you talk a little bit about kind of just the context that you look at different applications from different schools?
Yeah, for sure. I hope this relieves people who are listening, because Penn has over 72,000 applications. And within that, in that group of applicants, we probably have 17,000 high schools represented. 17,000 different high schools around the world are sending applicants to us. There is not any school that is exactly like some other school. There are different curricular offerings. There are different rules around getting access to curriculum. There are different grading systems, different weighting systems. Some don't have any grades at all. Some have, very serious exams spread really far apart. Other environments, students are assessed regularly. Some of it is not organized in a way that looks like subject matter. It looks like sort of content and skill mastery and things. So our job is to make sure we understand what is the school's approach toward learning and curricular offerings. And then we need to look at what a student has done in that school environment with what was available and determine whether or not that student has achieved both a level of content knowledge and the skills needed to draw on it, like I said earlier, to be able to take on what we need them to do when they start at Penn. So that doesn't mean they have to be perfect, but for instance, if you want to be in Penn engineering and you haven't had physics, we can't help you make that up as a starting point. But so that will be really important. Whether or not your school has AP Physics, AP Physics C, whether you're taking another level of physics called something else, our job is to figure out what it means and whether or not it has even a settled starting point to move forward at Penn. But not every school has, not even every school at Penn has that. So, there's often a question about calculus. Do you have to have calculus to get into one of the most selective schools? A lot of our students do have calculus, and it is really important if you're going to be in engineering. But if you are in one of the other schools, calculus isn't always necessary depending on what it is that you want to pursue. So we're like dialing into the layers of what is the student's intention and what is it that they have in their environment that can demonstrate to us whether or not we think they're ready. And part of looking at, there's what's available, and then there's also what did a student take, and then how well did they do with it. And the what did they take is partly to understand how far have they gotten in a particular subject, but also if you're going to take on a place like Penn, you need to be pretty self-motivated academically, and you have to have an established disposition of reaching for things that are of interest to you and being able to commit to it. So one way of seeing that is a student's willingness to take courses that are more difficult than what's required to graduate.
Thanks. And Sal, can you talk a little bit about that self-motivation piece? Because I mean, it's kind of at the heart of a lot of what kind of the founding of Khan Lab School in many ways, kind of that student agency and moving at your own pace and some of that. How should families think about that?
It's interesting. Look, we've even seen this sometimes at Khan Lab School, like where we have, I'm a big fan of like students driving as much of the school as possible, even to the point that we actually do have students actually teaching classes, legitimate classes that you get credit for, and et cetera, et cetera. And, we've had some parents immediately see the benefit of that. I mean, on both sides of the students who are able to teach, and then the students who are actually able to get actually some of the most advanced courses we have at Khan Lab School, like our multivariable course and our like philosophy course and our linear algebra course, they're primarily taught by students. But some parents are like, wait, wait, this isn't what like the school that I'm used to. I thought like a good school looks like certain facilities and a certain look, the professor should look a certain way. And, but I try to remind folks, including these parents who might feel a little anxiety about this not looking like what they're used to or what a fancy school should look like or whatever, is these kids are learning to really drive their own learning. And that is honestly, regardless of where they go to college, probably the most important skill of all. But especially when we talk about how do you make the decision right when you go to college, if you go to a place like Penn, but you just kind of do the bare minimum and you're not really part of the community and you're not taking advantage of all of the opportunities, which are like infinite on the campus, like you didn't need to go to Penn. But you need to learn how to pull things for yourself and make something out of it and become a leader in a community and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I actually think all too often you have parents, and this goes back to the previous thing, they get so much anxiety, they want to hire coaches, they want to micromanage what their kids are doing. And look, I'd like, you know, I wish I could say that never works. I have seen cases where maybe that did work a little bit, where the micromanagement maybe did get the kid someplace where the kid might have not gotten on their own. But once they're there, it still kind of reverts back to normal a little bit. Um, and so the more that, you know, what we try to do with our students, and every parent listening or every student listening, like the more that you can build that muscle, you know, especially even in middle school, high school, of you pulling and you owning your own learning and you figuring out how to, you know, being able to introspect and see what do you care about, and that you can go out there and get those opportunities, and also be able to um, know how to, you know, I don't, you know, part is we don't want people to just be all about marketing yourself, but part of life is marketing yourself, but doing it in an authentic way, and doing it in a way that's, you know, you're not being something that you're not. Um, I think the more, yeah, the more that we can have students develop it, the better. And so I hope, you know, even the Khan Lab School parents who are worried when they're like, wait, my kid's being taught by another kid. Well, that might be your kid next year who's teaching the multivariable class. Which, by the way, you know, when we write letters to colleges, we're like, you know, it's pretty special for a student to be able to teach some of the most advanced classes, to teach a philosophy class, to teach a multivariable class. And these classes are taught at a very high level of rigor that honestly, these classes don't even exist in a lot of high schools. Um, that's not just leadership. That's just not content knowledge. That's leadership. I mean, there's all sorts of skills that. So anyway, long-winded way of saying, yeah, owning your learning matters. The more that we as parents and schools can get out of the way and let students take advantage of that, the better. And even if they struggle a little bit, it's better that they struggle now than they struggle, you know, when they go to college or beyond.
Well, and I think a lot of students are kind of nervous about that, or hesitant to kind of be self promoters, right? And I try to frame it for them as more just kind of being proud of what you do and your strengths, and sharing that with other people. Or rather, I mean, it's not bragging. It's not, you know, it's again back to that being authentic about kind of what gets you up in the morning and what excites you, and what how you're bringing that to a community. And Whitney, I just want to kind of go back to the essay piece for a second, because I think one of the really kind of creative and unique things about Penn is one of your supplemental questions, and maybe you could just briefly touch on that. And because Sal was earlier saying, you know, colleges want people who are going to come and contribute to their community, and I think what you kind of put out there as a prompt gets at that.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. And I saw as the questions were scrolling, um, just a comment that it sounds like no matter what, those rigor really matters. And so I think actually talking about other components of the application besides the transcript will help round that out a little bit. And so as an example, you know, institutions design questions on purpose. The questions that we put in the application and ask you to answer, whether it's writing, like a short answer prompt or an essay prompt, or whether it's asking you to tell us about your activities or if there's additional information. We're asking those things because we look to them to give us information about things that we value. And so if you're applying to Penn, because we have 4 schools, in addition to the essay, the primary essay that you would write, you'll have questions that are specific to us. And one of them is, which school are you applying to? And tell us why you're interested in that. That's pretty straightforward. We need to know that, why are you interested in nursing? Or why are you interested in engineering? Or why are you interested in philosophy in the College of Arts and Science? So that's pretty straightforward. That's information. But the way a student answers a question like that gets you some insight into how they communicate what they care about. And they'll give you examples of, I'm interested in nursing because, right? And then you start to learn a little bit about their experience. One of the things that we wanted to add to our application, because what we're always doing is evaluating whether or not the questions that we ask and the information that come from the way that we asked it are getting us closer to what it is we're trying to learn. And does it work well enough for everybody for that question to be there? You know, is it an equitable way of gathering information for which the answers that we value are not all resource-driven answers? And so when we think about how students are going to participate as live humans on our campus and be in classrooms and be friends and contribute in lots of different ways, we added a question that asks them to write a short thank you note to somebody that they haven't thanked before and want to acknowledge, like for real. And short, 150, 200 words. It was intended to be a question from which we could see evidence that a student would notice and be able to respond to positive influence of other people. That's what we were trying to get at, because in a community, it's really important to know that you're not always the main character and other people can contribute in ways that are really positive to you. And by turning it into a thank you note, which was advice that we got from wonderful folks at Penn, Adam Grant and Angela Duckworth and Martin Seligman helped us with this, and turning it into the thank you note, is that, for one thing, the science really says that when you thank somebody, not just talk about being grateful, but you actually thank a person, it feels really good to the person doing the thanking. Like, you actually feel good feelings. And if you're reading it to somebody, the person hearing it also feels good feelings. So we designed a question that hopefully students would feel good answering in an otherwise really stressful process. And also, everybody can do it and you can't get it wrong. This is not a competitive question. It's not a sorting question. It's not who can be more grateful or is grateful about the best thing. That, everybody has something and somebody for which they're grateful, and they can say thank you for that thing. And so the first year that we did it, which was, this is our third year now, we had about 60,000 applications that year. That was 60,000 students who wrote thank you notes. That's 60,000 thank yous that went out into the world that year. And with no other purpose in our application other than bringing us very authentic, just information. It was all good for everybody. Everybody's answer is good, because if you're thanking somebody, that's great. And so I appreciate you asking the question, because I hope it brings insight to families that are listening, that it is only one example of ways that we are viewing students that are very separate from achievement. And when we look at activities, we're also looking at how they spend their time, which could be things that include achievement. They could be very competitive in something. They could be have a skill that they've spent a lot of time learning. They also could be working 25, 30 hours a week. They could be looking after family members. They could be commuting 2 hours and 4 buses back and forth to school. And that's a very useful kind of understanding of how a student is spending a huge portion of their time. And we're responsive to that. I mean, that's really important.
Well, and it signals what you value as an institution too, right? I mean,
Right.
it's interesting because it kind of aligns with something we do at Khan Lab School, which is I call peer props. And so as we're writing letters of recommendation for students, we ask the students' peers to share memories, to share moments, to share stories, to share strengths that they see in their peers, because so often it is those peers that kind of recognize those authentic pieces of them. And so then we incorporate that into our letter to colleges saying, this is not only what our adult community thinks about this student, but this is also the way they've impacted their classmates, which I think is also, it's often fun to see. And I think it's students kind of getting this experience of applying to college can be so focused on the individual and how do you stand out and all that, but so it kind of centers also on the communal aspect of it.
And I would add too, just back to the point about authenticity, which we've all talked about so far tonight, is that you don't have to make yourself stand out, because every student is unique. I mean, everybody does stand out just by holding space here in the world as not like anybody else. So, when we go back to where we were talking earlier in the session of, ways in which students get sort of turned toward who they need to be, it's such a sacrifice of the starting point, which is unique and separate and stand out. And so putting the effort into bringing those things forward in the structure of an application for a student really is one of the most powerful ways to prepare and submit an application.
So there's a question here for both of you. We'll do maybe two more questions, and there's a question here from Denise about kind of ways that UPenn maybe uses any structured framework or assessment for evaluating an applicant's character. And Sal is also asking you, have you seen any effective models for assessing social emotional non-cognitive skills in students that could be integrated into admission? So maybe Whitney, will start with you, and then Sal, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. So when we're reviewing, well, first of all, I should say that in my career, I've done a lot of work working with faculty who are very skilled in assessment in this way, and so have designed review processes that are there's no perfect component in an application, and there's no perfect way of reviewing an application. So if we just sort of allow for the fact that there's nothing Loctite here, but to understand, first of all, what it is that we value as an institution, and how are we looking for that in the application, and do the questions that we ask bring forward information that helps us evaluate it. And so at Penn, we're looking for academic preparation and content in the way that I've been talking about that. That includes the specific high school, the curricular available at that high school, what the student has done with it, and how they're performing relative to their peers, not how they're performing relative to a curriculum they don't have and a school they don't go to. Testing is separate from that. It's not blended into an academic assessment. Testing used to be required at Penn forever, and then during the pandemic, Penn became test optional, has been test optional since, and will return to a testing requirement for next year. Testing has always been there, is my point. Even when it has been optional, it's present for a lot of students. But even when it was required, and when it will be required again, our primary academic assessment is around those other components. Testing sits as a standalone, its own thing. We have a way of assessment and a way of thinking through it that has been very deliberately designed to think about contribution and how does a student contribute to their environment. And again, we do this thinking about ways in which students can demonstrate awareness of their environment and how they can contribute within it. That doesn't have to be resource-based. It doesn't have to be being able to travel to a place to do service. Those are great experiences, but we also value the students who are, as I mentioned earlier, something like, they go home after school and they take care of their siblings and prepare their dinner and help them with their homework, and then they do their own. That's a huge contribution example right there. So there are multiple ways that we think about contribution. And then the other thing that we look at is purpose. And is the student able to explain to us and demonstrate in some way how they are able to organize their time around things that matter to them, where they have choice in how they can spend their time? Is it working in a way where you can tell that they have an interest in something and can apply themselves? And this doesn't mean that a student has to have had a passion, a singular passion, and become really good at it. Some students do, but some students, their purpose is trying out a lot of things and exploring. And you can see that pattern happening, and you can imagine that that's what they would do on our campus. And so we have ways of talking about this when we're reading and evaluating students with one another. And it's very organized. So it's not a random free-for-all.
Thanks. Sal, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, on the question about like ways of measuring like social emotional or other like character traits that might not show up in a test score. Yeah, I mean, look, this is the interesting thing because the standard way of doing this right now is through recommendations, essays, some of the the narratives that you see in these applications. I've thought over the years that, and I think some colleges do this, on-demand video. I've done a little here there on that, like that. There could be some interesting things about videos. I don't know all the rules about what you can submit and not submit, but I think if there is a space for that type of thing, that might be an opportunity to do it. I'll give an example of two projects that I've been closely involved in that I think are actually could do a lot here. We started a sister nonprofit to Khan Academy called Schoolhouse.world, which you're also involved with, Brennan. And the whole idea was, just as at Khan Lab School, we have students teaching other students, and in many cases, they're some of the best, beloved teachers in the school. What if we could do that at scale, especially during the pandemic where people are isolated? What if we could do that on Zoom, where someone, it doesn't have to be a student, but it could be a student in Detroit, could be tutoring someone in New Delhi, and also someone in Shanghai, and also someone in Dallas. And so one of the first questions is, well, how do we know whether someone's even qualified to tutor someone in, say, calculus or physics or American history? And so we said, well, we have practice and assessment on Khan Academy, but we have no way of proving that that's actually their work. But what if someone took the Khan Academy assessment, recorded their face, recorded their screen, while they explained their reasoning out loud, and then they get to 90% on Khan Academy, and then it gets peer reviewed by someone else to make sure that they didn't cheat, that they were able to explain their reasoning? That's a pretty good way of authenticating whether someone knows that material and they did the work. So we did that, and we started these little transcripts on Schoolhouse and then if you pass that, then you start your tutoring journey, and we train you. And Jim Nondorf at the University of Chicago, one of Whitney's peers, head of admissions there, said, hey, all these standardized tests and even AP scores and stuff have been really hard during the pandemic. Could we use this certification for college admissions? And we're like, sure, why not? And since then, and there's been many universities. Whitney, I'd love to talk to you about UPenn, but it's a lot of the peer institutions to UPenn, the U Chicagos, the Browns, the Dartmouths, the MITs of the world, and there's 30 or 40 other universities. They at least will look. They don't require you to do this on Schoolhouse, but they view this as a way. And I just met a young woman virtually who's a freshman at MIT who is who grew up in Afghanistan, in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, wasn't allowed to go to school. And she learned a lot on Khan Academy. This is how she was able to prove to MIT that she knew her stuff. Because there's no SAT, there's no AP test, there's no IB where she was. There's no school for her. And so that is one element. And what a lot of these schools have discovered is it's one thing if someone can certify their knowledge. It's a whole other thing if they can go on and tutor other students. So because that shows, once again, leadership and communication and definitely content knowledge. And we have a little bit of an Uber rating where you can do that. So we've heard anecdotally that, the students who are becoming strong tutors are doing very well in a lot of these college admissions, because that's not like, just some tutoring or some volunteer that you kind of put on your resume and it's hard to vet like how substantive it was. This is like truly substantive stuff. And I say it's social emotional because it's not just content. You have to have a lot of those social emotional skills to be a strong tutor. Another project, and I don't know if we've even officially announced it yet, but I'll preview it. When we talk to a lot of the admissions officers, and once again, Whitney, I'd love to talk to you more about this. We said, hey, we were doing this certification thing. What else could we do? And a lot of admissions officers told us, well, and it's obviously relevant to what's been going on in the world. Like if there was a way that we could give students an experience on how, we want them to have passion on issues, and we want them to have passion on there's no wrong or right answer on any one hot button issue, which side to be on, but we want people to be able to have passion, but be able to do it in a civil way and be able to listen to others, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're launching something called Dialogues, once again on the Schoolhouse platform, where we're making students, and this will sound scary to folks at first, we're making students fill out surveys on all of the hottest hot button issues. So, we can go from gun control to, politics to conflicts in the Middle East to, we could go down the list of the things that people are almost afraid to talk about because they don't want to lose friendships. And people fill out a survey, and then we pair you with someone who's diametrically opposite to you. And then the goal is not to have a debate, but to talk to each other about your point of view, and then to make sure you understand the other person. And then you fill out a little form that says, did the other person hear me? Do you think they can represent your point of view? Can you represent their point of view? And then you can kind of collect those and showcase what other people have said about you. Hey, Sal really, even though I don't agree with his point of view, I really felt like he heard me. I feel like he can represent me. I have more respect for where he's coming from, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's another thing that if students participate in these dialogues, one, I think it'll be a great experience. I've seen some of the videos of some of these. They've actually been beautiful. We've done 100 tests so far. None of them have gone bad. I'm not saying that some of them might not, but I actually think things like that. And then last but not least, these aren't the only ways, but these are available to anyone. In the future, I think artificial intelligence, it's a minefield. We got to make sure about bias, et cetera, et cetera. But, humans have bias too. So if we can stress test it for that, I think there will be ways that, standardized tests of the future won't just be whether you got the multiple choice questions right. You'll have a chance maybe to communicate, to solve problems, to create a little bit more, which I think could also give more dimension to some of these applications.
Absolutely. And there's a shout out here in the chat from a parent who says, my student is now at Cornell and was on the leaderboard at Schoolhouse and might have been his favorite extracurricular. He wants to be do a PhD and become a professor. So such a great avenue for kids. So we are at the end of our time together. There were a lot of questions we didn't get to, and we will be back next month, and we'll be talking about, especially talking about summer and how to think about summer involvement. And there's some questions about kind of pay to play programs and things like that, and we'll kind of dispel some of the myths around that. So appreciate you all attending. Whitney, Sal, grateful for your participation, and we'll talk to you next time. In
Thank
college.
you so much. Thanks for everybody listening in, spending time with us.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks, Brennan. Thanks, everyone.